Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca, otherwise known as Hip Knit Hooray Online, and today I'm going to be filming a knit and chat Q&A. So I have shifted the setup. I'm sitting on my bedroom floor in front of my hobby shelf. I thought that this would be a really nice and casual video just to chat and knit together. So I'm going to be answering questions that I got from my Instagram story and Google poll that I put up asking for questions, and I got quite a few questions, more questions than what I think I could answer in a video of a reasonable length, just because I know I'm going to be super chatty. So I have decided to split up the Q&A into two parts. I'm going to film the first one today, which is going to be more focused on my knitting story, I guess, and more personal questions. And then the second one is going to be more focused on projects and yarn and techniques and things like that. So yeah, I have the two format video, and even then I worry that this video is going to be really long. So yeah, grab your knitting, grab a beverage if you want, get into a comfy spot, and we can knit and chat together. So the first question I got is, what am I knitting on right now and why? And I decided for this knit and chat that I would try to knit something kind of simple. So I am knitting a Pop-Tart ornament. This is going to be on double pointed needles, so maybe a little bit fiddly. I might have to switch to another project, but it is just stockinette. So yeah, pretty simple project. And the reason why I am knitting this is because I have been on a bit of a challenge to use up all of my scrap yarn from projects and make knitted ornaments. And if you watch my previous videos, you'll know that I love making knitted ornaments. They're probably my favorite things to make because you can experiment with color, you can learn different techniques, and they're really fun. They're relatively quick to make. So yeah, I am knitting this ornament, and the reason why is because I am going to be vending at a local craft market to me. I mentioned this in a podcast episode, I think back in July when I first started working on ornaments this year, that I was thinking of signing up for a craft show. And so I found one that was local to me, and we're going to be trying it out. I'm both equally excited and very nervous at the same time. And it's been a lot of work, but a lot of fun to figure out like the setup of things and to knit some of the ornaments for the event. So yeah, I might talk about it a little bit more in a future podcast episode, but that's what I'm working on right now. And then the next question is, what motivated me to start a knitting channel? And I mentioned this in my first podcast episode, but I started my YouTube channel because I wanted to make podcasts and chat about my projects. I am a big consumer of knitting content here on YouTube. I always have knitting podcasts on in the background, whether or not I'm knitting. If I'm cooking, cleaning, getting ready, I always have knitting podcasts on. And I just really enjoyed them and hearing people's thoughts about yarn and projects and patterns. So I was a big consumer of this content. And then the second reason was I have knitting friends that I meet up with, and we love chatting about our projects. We can go on hours and hours and talk about knitting, but I just felt like that wasn't enough for me, and there was still so much that I wanted to say about projects. And I thought that, you know what, I kind of do want to sit down in front of a camera and just talk about all of my makes and things that I enjoyed about projects, things that I didn't enjoy so much. So I just wanted an outlet to be able to share all of that. And then the third reason, which kind of relates, is because of my Instagram. And I love my Instagram as almost a knitted diary or like portfolio, or it's not really a portfolio for anybody but myself, but almost like a diary to document my knitting projects. And I feel like I have a pretty efficient system down. Like I always like to take a photo of the yarn, and then a few check-in photos of the whip, and then the finished object photos. And for me, I just love it to look back on a project and see it from beginning to end. But there's only so much that you can say in an Instagram caption. If a caption is really long, to be honest, I don't really read the whole thing because I just don't have maybe the attention span for it. And yeah, there's only so much that you can say in a very quick Instagram post. And I just felt like with knitting Instagram as well, it was very much like you post and then you move on to that. At least that's how I kind of saw my Instagram. And there wasn't really a time to like reflect on how much I wore the garment, how I actually liked the pattern process, all the modifications that I made. So I just really wanted a YouTube channel to be able to talk in depth about all of those things. And I really like documenting that. So that's kind of why I started the channel. And it was mainly for podcasting, but I have been really enjoying the other content, I guess, that is popular on knitting YouTube, which is like seasonal planning videos. Those are my favorite types of videos to film, or like pattern roundups, because I love doing deep dives on Ravelry. I kind of want to get into knit vlogs, but I don't think that I will film them very well because I just backtrack on a lot of projects. And also, I knit a lot in the evening, so maybe not the best lighting either. So yeah, we'll see about the knit vlogs, but I started my knitting channel because of podcasts and have been creating other content through that and have been having a lot of fun. And the next question is the most popular question by far, and it's not surprising because I think when I watch a lot of knitting podcasters, this is what I'm always very curious about, and it is, what do I do for work and do I enjoy my job? And another question that someone asks is if I knit full-time, and I wish that was the case. I wish that I did, but I do have a day job, and I'm an urban planner, which is a really fantastic job. I do really love the profession and the field. Urban planning, I feel like, at least when I was in school, is not something that is a very common job that's spoken about to youth, I would say. I didn't really come across urban planning until I was in university. So I actually always wanted to be an elementary school teacher. So that is what I went to university for. I did my undergraduate degree in that, and it was through searching teachable subjects. I always had an interest in geography, so I was starting to take some geography classes, and at my university the department is the Department of Geography and Urban Planning. So I started taking urban planning classes, and then that's when I just was really totally hooked on the field. I'd say that my everyday job is pretty technical and not the most creative. You can definitely go down the creative route in urban planning and on the more design side and design buildings or even like master plan communities or parks, but I am on the more drier policy long range planning side. So I'd say my everyday job is really fulfilling, but it's not the most creative. So that's why I really enjoy having knitting as a creative outlet and a hobby. And that leads me to my next question, kind of, which is how much time every week do you spend knitting? And I feel like it kind of really varies, but I don't have any pets. I don't have any kids. And I live with my boyfriend, so I feel like every day I have quite a bit of time to knit after work. So I would say on the weekdays, I usually knit between like 2 to 5 hours, I would say, per day in the evenings. Yeah, if I'm like really on a knitting marathon, I'll knit 5 hours, but normally I would say like the average in the evenings is like 2 to 3 hours. And then on the weekends, I try to keep a little bit of a social life and hang out with friends, see my family. So I would say that some days, like if I'm not doing anything, I will knit the whole day because I can, I guess. But ever since I did start this YouTube channel, I would say I do have less time to actually knit, and I am kind of focused more on like filming and planning videos and editing. So I have less time to knit now, but I would still say like I have a lot of time to dedicate to this hobby. So yeah, at least a few hours every day. I kind of regret knitting this Pop-Tart because I keep messing up how many stitches I need to cast on, because I need to leave a long enough tail where I can seam it at the end. But counting stitches and trying to talk at the same time is a little bit difficult, but I'm going to try this for the last time. And then if not, I'm going to switch to another project. But the next question I got was, when and how did I learn how to knit? And I first learned to knit through school. There was a knitting club at my school when I was in 5th grade. And I can't remember if it was somebody's mom who just came in or if it was like some sort of support staff or volunteer at the school. I can't remember, but this lady had taught a bunch of us how to knit the very classic garter stitch rectangular scarf on straight 6mm needles and worsted weight yarn. So I would say I think it's pretty common in a lot of schools where that's how you would learn to knit. So I learned in 5th grade, and then I didn't really continue knitting as a child. I didn't really pick up a fiber arts or any sort of fiber related craft for probably like a decade. And then when I was applying to grad school, I was just extremely anxious and I needed something to keep my hands busy and like my mind distracted. So then I picked up crocheting, and I used to crochet quite a lot. I crocheted a lot of blankets, some home decor, and some accessories like mittens and hats. But when I wanted to start crocheting garments, I found that it was really hard to get good drape with crochet garments. And I feel really bad saying this because I don't really want to say that like knitting is better than crochet or anything like that. But I just found with crochet garments, it was really hard to get a good fit because you create a much thicker fabric, and I was always kind of looking for crochet garments that look like something that you could knit. And also the third reason is you use a lot of yarn for crochet garments, like way more than you do for a knitted garment. So it was also maybe like an economical reason as well, because I was a student, I didn't have a lot of money. So I was like, okay, maybe I should try to pick up knitting. So then since I already kind of had the basics down, since I learned how to knit when I was 10, I feel like it was kind of easier to pick it up again because I wasn't totally learning from scratch. But I did knit a garter stitch shawl, another classic beginner project before I started knitting any sort of sweater or cardigan. So I don't even remember who the designer is or what the pattern was that I knit. But it was a garter stitch shawl instead of a rectangular scarf with super scratchy acrylic yarn. It was from Loops and Threads, but it was like maybe from 2017 or 2018. They don't produce that yarn anymore, and it was super scratchy. Never wore the shawl when I bound it off. So that was kind of a little bit of a waste of time, but I learned the basics again, like relearned the basics. And then I just went straight into garment or sweater knitting. So then I knit the Aosta sweater by the Knit Pearl Girl, which was a really popular pattern at the time when I first started knitting. And I don't wear that sweater anymore. I still have it at my parents' place, but I don't love the yarn that I used. I think Bernat, some sort of Bernat baby yarn. And then I also realized that I don't love the look of balloon sleeves on me and like a chunkier weight sweater. So I actually don't really wear that sweater anymore, but those were the first projects that I made and got me started on this knitting hobby. The next few questions that I got are kind of all related to advice that I would give to beginner knitters. So the first is where to start with knitting. So I would say maybe don't do what I did and knit such a large project unless that's what you want to do. I would say start off small. If your goal is to knit garments, I would say start off small with like a smaller accessory, but then I think you can start knitting garments right away. So I'd recommend, I know that Petite Knit has gotten a little bit of hate for designing the Sophie shawl, or I don't know, maybe designing is a strong word because it's such a simple pattern. It's still a design, but the Sophie scarf or the Sophie shawl, just because it's so simple. However, I think that that is a great beginner project because first off, you can use any really type or weight of yarn because it is a scarf or a shawl, whichever one you want to do. I'll maybe use the Sophie scarf as an example, but you can use any weight and any needle. You also only need one needle. I think that that can be a big deterrence for beginner knitters is with sweaters. You can do all of it in theory with one circular needle, or you can knit them flat and then seam them. But I think that with a lot of garments, because you need like a 16-inch cable and then you switch to your 24-inch cable and then you use 16-inch cables for the sleeves, like because you need so many different needle sizes or cable sizes, it really deters beginner knitters for even starting garments. So I would say with the Sophie scarf, because you just need the one needle size since you're knitting flat, it's great to learn the basics of knitting. Alternatively, you could also knit a hat. I haven't knit these two patterns before, but they're both free from Purl Soho, and I actually searched them up because I was thinking of knitting one for myself later this year. But the classic ribbed beanie or the classic cuffed hat, those ones are hats that are knit bottom up, so you can really learn how to knit in the round, how to knit a knit stitch. The only thing is there is the decreases at the top crown of the hat, but I think at that point, once you have knit that much, I think you're ready to learn the decreases and also knitting on a small circumference. It's really pretty simple, and also you end up getting something functional at the end of the day. So I would say as a beginner, those are the two projects that I'd recommend: the Sophie scarf or some type of ribbed or stockinette bottom up hat. Okay. The next question that I got is, what do you wish you had known as a beginner knitter, and what advice would you give yourself as a newbie knitter? So I wrote down a few points. The first is, I think most people that would be watching this, if you are a beginner knitter, probably want to knit garments, or I don't know, maybe I'm kind of assuming that, but I feel like garments kind of feel a little bit intimidating. But I think if you've knit a very small project before, or if you just know the basics of knit and purl, you can definitely knit a garment. I would say start off with, I wanted to recommend a sweater like the Aosta sweater, but I just really don't like the fit of it because there's no shaping. So I think what I'd recommend as like a first garment project is a stockinette cardigan. Yeah, like maybe the Novice cardigan by Petite Knit, or the cardigan number 7 by My Favorite Things Knitwear. Again, really popular patterns, but I think for good reason, because you really get the basics of construction down with those. And because it's a crew neck cardigan, if it doesn't have shaping, I still think it's comfortable and you'll still continue to wear it even as you start to knit other more advanced I guess techniques. Most of the things that I've knit are still stockinette, so still pretty basic, but once you start learning more shaping, then I think that those cardigans are still something that you would continue to wear. So that's the first thing. Yeah, just go for it and maybe knit a cardigan as your first garment. The second relates to that, which is short rows really improve the fit. So I think that's what I would tell my beginner self. They really improve the fit, and they're really not that hard to learn. So I would totally recommend learning those as soon as you can. And the third tip that I would have is, when you are looking at yarn substitutions or alternatives, I think composition is just as important to look at as the yarn weight. So I've kind of learned this maybe kind of the hard way a little bit, but sometimes for projects I would just look at the weight of the yarn, and if it was a fingering weight, I was like, okay, that's perfect. Or if that was a DK weight, yeah, I can totally do that and substitute it. But there's so much more with the composition of the yarn that can impact how the garment fits. Like for example, I knit the Nelly top by Spectacle Streak. It used a DK weight merino, and I used a DK weight bamboo. And I thought because it's DK weight, it would be totally fine, but no, the composition totally matters, and it totally affects the fit of the garment. Same thing with like the ply of the yarn, like using a blown yarn for something where you maybe need something a little bit more rustic, or you need 100% wool. Using a blown yarn versus a traditional like Peruvian Highland wool is going to kind of create a totally different fabric, and that's not really something that I thought of that much as a beginner. So yeah, composition is just as important as the weight when you're substituting. And then the last one is to invest in a set of interchangeable needles early, or as early as you can, because like I was mentioning, I think that is a big deterrent for garments, just because if you buy all the needles individually, it can really add up. So I would recommend getting an interchangeable set. I really like Knit Picks interchangeable needles. Those are the needles that I still use to this day. And I think that at the time, they're probably still the same price. I think I got an interchangeable set for, I think $60, which kind of seems like a lot, but after you knit like 2 to 3 projects, I think that you can definitely accumulate $60 worth of fixed needles after just, a few projects. So I think totally worth it to start investing in an interchangeable set early, and it can be an affordable one too. And the next two questions that I got are kind of related. It's, would you use cheap Michael's acrylic yarn, and if so, what patterns? And the second is, any feedback on the long-term wear of more cost-effective yarns. So the first thing is, would I use cheap Michael's acrylic yarn? And I think that I totally would. I just wouldn't use the yarn for garments. I think that acrylic definitely has its place. It's affordable. It's machine washable. I would knit like home decor with it. I've crocheted a lot of blankets with 100% acrylic yarn, and really nice blankets that I continue to even use like to this day. So if I wanted to knit a blanket and I was really on a budget, I would use 100% acrylic yarn or like a pillow, but I wouldn't use it for a garment, to be honest. I just think with the amount of hours that you spend knitting a project, you may end up a little bit disappointed if you use 100% acrylic yarn, just in terms of the fit of it, and also the feel, and also the knitting process. Like, acrylic can be quite squeaky, I would say, so it's also not the best in terms of the knitting process. That kind of relates to the next question about the feedback of long-term wear of more cost-effective yarns. So yeah, like I was saying, since I started knitting when I was a student, I just was very broke. I didn't have a lot of money, and that is where, like, big box stores is where I would get a lot of my yarn from. So I would go to Michael's and I would try to get wool blends, like Lion Brand Wool Ease, or like try to use blends of more natural fibers. So like I use Premier Yarns Cotton Fair, and I found that it's still better to use those wool blends or like cotton blends rather than just 100% acrylic, but they haven't really held up that well. Actually, I would say it's not even that they haven't held up well, because it's not like they're disintegrating or anything like that, but I think that the biggest issue with synthetic fibers like that is it's gonna sound so nasty and like disgusting, but it's just the way that you feel wearing them. Like, when you wear a majority acrylic sweater, you just get really sweaty when you wear it. It just doesn't have the same, I guess, breathable properties as wool. So I find that with those sweaters, like my Marseille sweater, I think it's absolutely gorgeous. That one is Premier Yarn Cotton Fair, so a mix of acrylic and cotton. I sweat a ton when I wear that project, and then the garment kind of starts to smell a little bit, even after only wearing it like once or twice. And obviously you should wash your wool sweaters, but you don't have to wash them as often, I would say. I only really wash my sweaters maybe like once every 5 or 6 wears, really, because they just don't absorb the smell and you don't sweat as much with them. So that's kind of how I feel about synthetic yarns from Michael's or other big box stores. I think the 100% wool you can get from there is great, like Patton's Classic Wool Worsted or Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool. Those are great, and I would totally recommend that. If you're more on a budget, I would say spend the extra few dollars and get that. I know it's really hard when you're on a budget, but I would say those are totally worth it, and just omit mohair from projects. The next question is, what are your thoughts on the knitting community in Toronto, and would you be open to hosting a knitting meetup or event here? And I would say I haven't attended a fiber festival here in Toronto or a knit night, so I can't really speak to too much of the knitting community here. I do think that there are a ton of knitters, or there must be a ton of knitters, because we have so many local yarn stores here. I think we are really spoiled for choice. There's so many. My local yarn store, the closest one to me, is, or it was, because they are closing this location, but it is Romney Wools on Queen West. And I love going in there. It has such a warm and cozy vibe. So that would have been the closest yarn store to me, but now the next one, I guess, would be Yarns Untangled in Kensington Market. So I do really love all of the yarn stores that we have. It's great, but I don't know too much about the local Toronto knitting community, if I'm being honest. In terms of hosting a future event, I don't know if I ever would, just because I am a little bit more introverted and a little bit more shy. But I guess never say never, maybe in the future. And then the next question I thought was really interesting, and it was, what are your opinions on the effect of social media on your knitting life? Lots of people get knitfluenced, and I'm curious if you find you're susceptible and if you view it as a positive or negative thing. And I would definitely say that knitting social media definitely has its pros and cons. I would say it's positive because if it wasn't a little bit positive, I wouldn't be doing it. Like I wouldn't be posting on Instagram. I wouldn't be posting videos on YouTube. I am definitely a product knitter. So I love being able to follow other creators and designers and see them create something. And then because I'm a knitter, I can just totally replicate it and create it for myself. So because of that, I love being able to go on Instagram and be inspired. I also really don't mind following knitting trends that much. I am quite susceptible, I think, to knitting trends, and I really don't have any shame with knitting the most popular pattern of the season, or like using the most popular yarn. Maybe I should be a bit more critical about that to myself and think about it, but if I see something that I like the very iconic terrazzo sweater by Petite knit, or like the sweater number 15 by My Favorite Things Knitwear in the Dusty Artichoke, which was super popular, I think back in 2022. Like I saw those pieces and I absolutely loved them and I wanted to knit them and I still want to knit them. And so I like social media for being able to see those things, and I don't mind, I guess, being knitfluenced in that way because I end up creating something that I really like at the end of the day. So honestly, like I do kind of like social media for that, being able to see knitting trends and being able to recreate them. But I think that there are definitely negatives as well to social media. And really it's the two main ones for me is like the consumerism aspect of it and then the content creation. So I do know that when I talk about patterns and yarn and projects on my YouTube channel, I can influence people to buy those patterns, buy that yarn. And so it is kind of tough because I do want to be able to chat about things, but I also don't want to mislead people, and I also don't want it to feel like it's like a sales pitch, I guess, or that I'm just encouraging people to just buy. So that's something that is kind of a negative, I think, and one that I'm trying to be a little bit more mindful of. And then the other one is content creation. So I noticed maybe earlier on this year that I felt like I was creating and knitting things for content creation, which is kind of like really sad to say, but I just felt like with my knitting podcast, if I wasn't showing like a finished object every single podcast episode, I was worried that people would lose interest, or like if I was taking too long to knit an item, people would just get bored. And maybe that is the case, but I found that I was knitting, like trying to find projects that I could knit very quickly so then I could have a finished object quite quickly, or just not being careful with the finished object and just knitting it for the sake of finishing it. Or another thing was trying to have a huge variety of whips because I wanted people to be able to find my content very interesting, even though I think naturally I really like having 3 to 5, and like 5 is also kind of a lot of whips. Like don't really like having that many, but I kind of felt pressure that I needed to, so I had something to show on YouTube and also on Instagram. So that's kind of been a bit of a negative, but I think I've come to reflect on that and realize that knitting is really slow, and it's okay to take your time creating things, to make mistakes and learn from them, as you may have seen from my honey vest, or like make modifications, try and experiment. And I think most knitters, like I enjoy people chatting about knitting, whether or not they finish their finished object or not. So I think that has been kind of a negative for me, like just balancing knitting for content creation versus something that I genuinely enjoy and something that I'm always trying to be a little bit mindful of. So I would say all in all, social media has been a positive in my life and something that I use like every single day, maybe as sad as it is to say, but I've been trying to think a little bit more about the negatives and how to kind of address them. The next few questions are a little bit more niche, but I thought that they're fun. The first is, do you have a knitted Christmas sweater and do you want to make one this year? And I don't really have a specific Christmas sweater. I would like to knit one. I've been saying since I started my channel that I want to make a red sweater for both Christmas and Chinese New Year, so I do need to knit that. That is on my list for this holiday season this year. So I don't really have one, but I would love to make one. I think I wrote it down, the Northern Augustins number 6 or the Holly cardigan would be really lovely festive sweaters that I would love to knit. They're both color work though, so I do need to get a little bit better at some color work maybe before I venture into that. Or maybe I'm ready. I'm probably ready to knit those, but I don't have a specific holiday sweater, but yes, I would like to knit one. The next is, could you imagine wearing a knitted wedding dress? And I haven't really thought about getting married too much, so I don't know, but I have thought about this, like knitting for a special occasion. And I think that if I were to get married, I don't think I would knit a wedding dress just because that's too stressful, but I would knit something to commemorate the occasion. Like I would knit a wedding shawl or like a cardigan or like some sort of wrap, and just invest a lot of my time into that, but maybe not the dress. I think that's like a lot of pressure that I would put on myself and get a little stressed over. I do think, yeah, knitting for special occasions though, I wish that I did and will do more of that in the future. Like for my graduation, I totally wish that I would have knit a graduation dress. I mean, I know I just said for my wedding dress, like that's too much pressure, but I think it was, who was it on Instagram? I think it was Oops and Loops, I think, but she knit a dress for her graduation, and it was so beautiful and it was so stunning, and I totally wish that I did that for my graduation. I did not, but yeah, knitting for a special occasion, I am totally planning to do in the future. The next question is, do you think you'll dip your toes into designing? And I think my answer right now is no, I don't think so. I don't really like the designing aspect of knitting at all. Like I barely self-draft anything, and if I do self-draft something, it's a construction that's very, very simple, like this Pop-Tart here. I find that for me, what brings me the most joy out of knitting is just the meditative aspect of it and how relaxing it can be for me, and that is because I knit from patterns. So I really enjoy just being able to follow a pattern and make something that I really love. There's also the big trial and error aspect of designing. You have to be prepared to completely frog a project, to redo, and I don't know if I wouldn't have the patience, because I think as knitters, you have to have a decent amount of patience to be able to knit a finished garment, just because of the amount of time that it takes. But being so invested in like working on something and then it totally not working and then restarting it, I just don't know if I have that in me. I kind of did that a little bit when I was freehanding some ornaments, like the little hat ornament that I made like 5 variations of it. And honestly, by the end of it, I was so frustrated and really annoyed. So I just don't think that I could do that for like multiple times in designing multiple garments. So yeah, long story short, or all to say, I don't think that I will be designing anytime soon. If anything, it would be like small things like ornaments, but that's kind of it. And I'm totally content knitting other people's designs. The next question is, what is your comfort show when knitting? And I would say that my boyfriend and I watch a lot of TV in the evenings, but the evening is also my knitting time. So I like to watch things where I'm able to watch and also knit at the same time. So I would say that I really like a lot of sitcoms when I'm knitting. I find that those are very comforting, and I like how they're pretty quick too. So I really like The Office. That's a great show, super funny. I like Modern Family, Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I like watching those shows, and they're also great to have on in the background, just some company to have. I also really like romantic comedy shows, I guess you could say. Like when I first started knitting and crocheting, my comfort show was Jane the Virgin on Netflix. I really loved that show. It was great to have on in the background, just really lighthearted and something that you could knit to. My boyfriend and I also really like watching reality dating shows. I think we're quite particular about them, but the ones that we really like are Love Island UK specifically. That is definitely our guilty pleasure. We like to wait for the whole season to drop and then just totally binge it. And then the other show that we've been watching lately is Terrace House on Netflix. It is a little bit harder to watch that one while knitting because you have to, I don't know Japanese, so I have to read the subtitles. So that one is a little bit challenging, but that is a great reality television show. It's very comforting. And yeah, I really like that show lately. And then the next question I got was favorite knitting podcasters to watch. And like I said, I am a big consumer of knitting YouTube. I like to listen to a lot of podcasters, and my favorites are Handmade by Florence, Future Fiber, Knits by Mandy, The Knitting Page, my friend Tar Knits. I know I'm definitely forgetting people, but those were kind of just the ones that I thought of off the top of my head. And I really also like watching knitting designers as well. More so just to hear about their designing process, as I find it really interesting to learn a little bit more about the garment from a designer's point of view. So I really like watching the Knit Pearl Girl. She has a really great knitting podcast, or Laura Penrose. Other YouTube channels that are really nice and comforting to just be able to knit along to, I find, are like small business creators as well. I really like watching Monica Razik, and also Made with April. What is her channel? Made with April. I find that those channels are still crafting oriented, so they are really fun for me to watch, and they do a lot of videos where they're just making, so it's almost like a productivity vlog in a way. As you're knitting, you can kind of watch them, and it's really interesting to see different crafts as well. Like Monica Razik does candle making and sewing, and then Made with April, she crochets flowers. So I really like watching their channels. Even if I don't make candles and I don't crochet, it's nice to be able to knit along as they're also crafting as well. Second last question is dream holiday or travel destination. And someone asked about the photo that I posted along with my story, Canvassing for Questions. And that photo was from my most recent trip when I went to Thailand. And that was a super, super hot day, but it was a really gorgeous temple that we went to there. So that was where I was for that photo. And then in terms of my dream holiday or travel destination, I would say that I really want to go to South America next. My boyfriend and I have been chatting about where our next trip will be, and his family is Argentinian, so we're thinking of going to South America next, and maybe going to Argentina, Peru, Colombia, and maybe Uruguay as well. So I'm really excited for that trip. I think that would be my next dream destination. But I do love traveling. I think in terms of knitting, I would love to go to Denmark just because of the knitting culture there. My boyfriend went with his friend a few years ago, and he would send me pictures of people knitting at cafes and people knitting at parks and like all the yarn stores he was seeing, and I was really jealous. So I would love to go to Denmark one day. Maybe not right now. For me, I think Denmark is kind of a country that I'll always be able to go to no matter what stage of life, in a way. So maybe not immediately, but I would love to go to Denmark just because of the knitting and fiber arts culture there. And then in terms of places that I've traveled to that have been a dream, I guess, and my favorite places, when I travel, I do like to go to cities. Just maybe I have that bias as a urban planner, but my favorite places that I've been to have been Madrid in Spain and Hanoi in Vietnam. They're very quaint cities with a lot of character, and I find that my favorite activity when I'm traveling is to just sit and people watch, and I found that those cities were, I always learned a lot from like the local lives of people when I was there, and just people watching the culture too. So yeah, those, I kind of went on a bit of a tangent. Those weren't really my dream destinations because I've kind of already been there before, but those have been my favorite places if you're ever looking for recommendations for travel. And then the last question, if you're still here, but this is a question that I have gotten a few times when I post videos, and it is about the books on this bookshelf. So someone had asked, do you like to read? And the sad answer, I guess, is no. I don't really like to read that much, if I'm being honest. I don't really read too much. I think in my everyday job, I read a lot, and so in my spare time, I just really don't like to. That also might just be an excuse a little bit, but I don't really read. None of the books on this shelf are my books. So when my boyfriend and I first moved into this apartment, we had this idea with this hobby shelf that since it's across from our bed, like when we first wake up, it's something that would bring us a lot of joy because you would wake up and you would see like all the books and all the yarns. So we have this shelf, and it's become a really great backdrop for my YouTube videos. But all the books on the shelf are not mine. They are his books. And then the next question was, are the books in the bookshelf behind you yours, or do they belong to someone else's? And how many of them have you read? And also someone asks for a bookshelf tour. So I asked my boyfriend if he wanted to come on this video and chat about his favorite books, and he was too shy and he said no, but he gave me his favorite books to recommend, so I will grab them. So he mainly reads nonfiction, and his top 4 books that he recommends are Happy City by Charles Montgomery, Landmarks by Robert McFarlane, The Corner by David Simon and Edward Burns, and The Great War for Civilization, The Conquest of the Middle East. So if you are ever curious about some book recommendations, those were his top 4 of books that he's read. I feel like we have a very different approach, I guess, to both of our hobbies. Like for my yarn stash, I really like getting the yarn and then thinking about it. So I do have a yarn stash accumulated, but for my boyfriend, he really likes to keep a very limited book stash, I guess you could say. So all the books here he has read before, and he only really has like 1 or 2 books that he keeps out in our living room of what he wants to read, and then he'll read it, take notes on it, and then put it on the shelf. So very systematic, and I have been trying to convince him to change the setup so it's maybe color coded and it looks a little bit better in my background, but they are organized by subject. So there is a reason for why the books are in a specific order, and that's why they never really change in the background of my videos. But yeah, knitting and reading are 2 really great hobbies to have together because we always can go to the park or like coffee shops together, and then I am knitting and he's reading. So they're 2 really great portable hobbies to have, but I personally don't read a lot myself. So that was everything for this video. I think I've been talking for almost an hour, maybe even over an hour. So I am glad that I split this Q&A in half because that was, I think, 20 questions, and then I'm going to have 20 more questions in a second installment. So yes, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much if you reached this point in the video. I did want to say that I'm really happy to be on this channel. I don't want to get too cheesy, but this was supposed to mark my 1 year on YouTube. So I'm really glad if you have stuck around and subscribed to the channel. And I hope that this video you got to know me a little bit better. And hopefully I wasn't too rambly. Maybe I was a little bit, but yeah, I hope that this video was interesting, and I will be coming with a podcast soon. I think I'm just getting ready for this craft fair. This is how much of the Pop-Tart that I was able to knit. So not very much because I had a lot of trouble with casting on and counting the stitches in this Q&A. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with this video, and it was fun answering all of your questions. So yes, part 2 is coming soon, and then maybe I will do one occasionally like this next year. But yeah, this format was really fun, and I'll see you in my next video.